Hi, everyone. Welcome. So delighted to be here and to have you join us. My name is Emily Kearns. I'm the coordinator for Dementia Friendly Baltimore County. And today we are delighted to welcome Gordon Kramer, who will be facilitating our last session in the 6-month series, Living with Dementia Roadmap series. And today we will be focusing on grief. The title for today's presentation is Tending to Our Grief on the Journey with Dementia, Exploring Loss and Discovering Meaning. So I will introduce Gordon. Gordon will facilitate, and then at the end we will have question and answers. And also, if you want to reach out to Gordon following this, he will have his contact information in the chat room. And we welcome you and we ask you to put your video on if possible so we can have a real sense of community and participation here. This is being recorded and it will be placed with the other 5 sessions in our 6-month series on our YouTube channel. If you have difficulty finding the recording later, you can always reach out to us and I can send you the link. But anyway, on we go. Welcome, Gordon. And let me share a little bit with all of you about Gordon. Gordon is the creator of the Mission Bridge. He currently serves as the program director at Well for the Journey. Well for the Journey is a spiritual wellness center in Lutherville, Maryland. As a contemplative and creative builder, Gordon has held leadership roles in healthcare programming and operations since 2001 at various assisted living, skilled nursing, and hospice communities. He's earned a Master's of Arts in Spiritual and Pastoral Care from Loyola University and a Master's of Arts in Theology from the Ecumenical Institute of St. Mary's Seminary and University. Currently, Gordon is a candidate for the Doctor of Ministry program at the Ecumenical Institute. Gordon has facilitated a diversity of retreats and workshops that focus on creating opportunities for participants to explore and to enhance their spirituality and well-being through various media and formats. Gordon also participates as a peer group leader in the Shalem, if I pronounced it correctly, Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formations Transforming Community Program. Gordon's passions include uplifting the journey of adults, individuals with memory impairment, and members of the LGBTQ+ community, as well as fostering support groups and programs for caregivers and those who are grieving losses. Gordon has been trained as a spiritual director, companion, end-of-life doula, and Reiki practitioner. Gordon welcomes all in discovering the spiritual life as a means of healing, expanding, and flourishing. And I am delighted to say, too, that Gordon is one of the key leadership members on the Dementia Friendly Baltimore County leadership team for the initiative. So welcome, Gordon, and take it away.
Thank you so much for that hospitality, Emily, and the Department of Aging, and a warm welcome from my heart to all of you who are joining us today for this program and for those who will view the recording. Emily had already named the connection between Well for the Journey and Dementia Friendly, and it's been burgeoning for about 3 years now. We're in our 3rd year of our partnership, and it really is a privilege to participate in the myriad of leadership activities and ways that Dementia Friendly is showing up in our state of Maryland, and it's very exciting. I'll also mention that in my tenure in healthcare, I really have been blessed and humbled and always inspired by thousands of individuals at this point who have had some kind of dementia and their care partners, and the story that I have given witness to in their journeys. To be a small part of that at that critical juncture has just been life-changing every time and very transformative. So I'll be drawing from my experiences there and the current work that I do at Well for the Journey for the dementia community and its care partners. I'll just say something else about Well for the Journey. We've been around almost 25 years, and our focus is on community and connection and spiritual nourishment. So recently, we've been able to welcome folks with memory impairment and their care partners, both loved ones and professionals, to our campus and our sacred little set of woods for nature engagement. And that really has been so reaffirming for this important work to stand and give witness to the reality that regardless of where folks find themselves on that dementia journey, connection and community and spiritual nourishment and wellness are still possible. As we move into our time together today, I'm going to invite you to make sure you have something to write with and something to write down upon. Maybe it's a journal, maybe it's paper, but there'll be a couple activities as we go along the way where I'll invite your deeper reflection. Part of what we do at the Well in any kind of program that we facilitate is to set some guidelines for how we hear and receive and share. And so I'm going to just speak a couple of those into our time together. One of those important ones is confidentiality. If anyone here shares from their heart today, whether it's a question or something of reflection, please know that that's being held in confidentiality and in a sacred way, because of you naming this part of your story. The other thing that I'd like to really ask us to do is to hold each other as we're hearing any kind of sharing or anything that I might speak into our community here as it forms. And in that holding, I invite you to come with a curiosity and a respect. We all are in different places in our caregiving and where we are in this journey with dementia. And so that respect is intrinsically necessary so that we can be open to all the possibilities that abound. And yes, I do mean possibilities. And then lastly, we all might use different language to describe the experiences of caregiving and how we offer as a care partner for our loved ones who have dementia, or if we are a professional caregiver. And so, again, maybe it's that curiosity with our communication, but whatever language we're using, if we need clarification, let's just ask a question. Could you repeat that? Or could you say a little bit more about that? Please hold me to that especially. So I invite us to think about those guidelines, and we can return to them if we need to. We're not here today for any kind of fixing or resolving. We're here for that deeper connection and that solidarity in our story of caregiving for folks with dementia. I'll also just share one thing from my own story of my time in healthcare, and that is when I first started, and this is back in 2001, there were many individuals I encountered with dementia, and I had a heart for serving seniors and the elderly, but I really didn't know anything about dementia. And then rather quickly, as I started my career there, I really learned that dementia is not, while it can be a cruel experience to lose your memory and how that affects you in your life and your relationships, there are still countless possibilities that occur. And part of it is reframing how we envision that person with dementia and how we journey with them as we invite them into being who they are, even though that keeps changing over time. And then years later, as I started to engage in hospice work as a volunteer coordinator, recruiting and training and helping volunteers cultivate their experience of serving people at the end of life, there were many folks who were in an end stage condition of dementia. And again, we kept coming up against the challenges. How do we break through in that way of offering that love and support and companionship, and wondering, is the person able to receive it because of their dementia? And again, the answer was yes, time and again, countless possibilities. So all of that filters into, in an organic way, of what I want to share with you today. With that said, you might be joining our MAP series for the first time, or this might be your 6th session, or you might have attended a few along the way. So I'm really going to invite you, wherever you are with that, to be open to integration. whether it's a message from today or any of the ones along the way, allow that all to come together, maybe as building blocks, maybe as deeper understanding for yourself and the person you're caring for, and the opportunity to create meaning out of it all. Because meaning is what is going to sustain you as you continue on this most important journey for caregiving and having the experience of dementia. So it's a time of integration. Because I am a retreat and workshop facilitator, I also want to invite us into a different format today for what you might experience. And that will likely be different if you've attended or watched the recordings of any of the previous sessions that we've had about our dementia map and navigating that journey. Okay, so with that said, and being true to that invitation, I'm going to invite us just to become still for a moment. And I want to share an opening blessing. It's a blessing of welcome that's written by Jan Richardson. And I invite you, wherever you find yourself on this journey, to just give yourself permission to be here today and to be open to receive whatever it is you are needing and desiring to receive. And also echoing that that is being shaped lovingly and creatively in the context of community and a hunger for deeper connection and what is spiritual or meaningful about this time and how that can nourish you. So to become centered and enter into a place of stillness, I invite us just to take a deep breath. And another deep breath. And one more deep breath for good measure. And allow your mind, with its questions and maybe frenzies and checklists and anything that's plaguing you in the way of worry or concern, allow that to be seen by your mind being anchored in your heart, that deeper place where your love comes from, where your authenticity is bred. And may you receive this blessing. When you are lost in your own life, when the landscape you have known falls away, when your familiar path becomes foreign and you find yourself a stranger in the story you had held most dear, then let yourself be lost. Let yourself leave for a place whose contours you do not already know, whose cadences you have not learned by heart. Let yourself land on a threshold that mirrors the mystery of your own bewildered soul. It will come as a surprise, what arrives to welcome you through the door, making a place for you at the table and calling you by your name. Let what comes come. Let the glass be filled. Let the light be tended. Let the hands lay before you what will meet you in your hunger. Let the laughter, let the sweetness that enters the sorrow. Let the solace that comes as sustenance and sudden unbidden grace. For what comes, offer gladness. For what greets you with kindly welcome, offer thanks. Offer blessing for those who gathered you in and will not be forgotten. Those who, when you were a stranger, made a place for you at the table and called you by your name. I invite us just to enter a brief silence to receive that blessing, to allow it to wash over you. And again, to open up to the possibilities awaiting you today. And so let's just take another deep breath and allow whatever came up for you. Hopefully, it was a time of respite and blessing, but allow whatever came up for you just to be with you as we continue this journey today. And so, as we continue, there will be times where I'm sharing from my slide deck. There will be a brief clip of a video to watch. And there will also be some time for journaling and sharing in our larger group. So again, I invite you to make sure you have something to write with and write upon as we continue. So as was already named, today's program is about tending to the grief that arises on the journey of dementia. So there is certainly the grief that the person with dementia is experiencing and perhaps to varying degrees is unable to name, or it's not a focus. And there is certainly the grief that arises from and within the experience of being a care partner for someone with dementia. And while that part of it might seem shadowy or dark or confusing or unclear, there is some real authenticity and truth around experiencing that loss by way of discovering meaning. So grief does come with an onslaught of emotions, and sometimes they can be very conflicting. And we'll explore that a little bit later on. But the title is very intentional in this regard. So it's important for us to be clear in our language. And so I have a couple guiding questions that I have placed here in the slide. I'm just going to speak them out. And I invite whatever questions are speaking to you, nudging you, shimmering before you, I invite you to pay attention to them, maybe write them down, know that they're there to return to, and that they will help to support us as this presentation unfolds. So the first one is grief. What is grief to us? How do we know grief as something personal? What changes, transitions, losses through endings, losses through deaths, have we experienced as human beings, as individuals? How is our grief collective? If we think back only a couple years ago, we were in the midst of a global pandemic. There was some serious collective grief. And how is grief collaborative? How can grief serve us? If we were created as we were created with many different adaptable gifts, traits, qualities, is there something about grief innately that allows us to collaborate with ourselves, with others, with nature, with whatever name we have for the divine, to be collaborative in that experience of releasing? Grief is often known as surrendering, releasing, letting go, and welcoming in. How is there collaboration between what we are called to let go of and what we are called to let in, to welcome in? And then lastly, can grieving benefit us at all? Particularly, especially as care partners for those who have dementia. I'm going to share two quotes with you, and then I'm going to invite us into an opportunity to reflect on that with a writing prompt or journaling prompt. So I consider this to be wisdom for contemplation. And both quotes come from Francis Weller, who's written a masterpiece called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I highly recommend it as reading for your journey as a care partner, particularly around what brings you sorrow and what grief offers us. So the first quote is, "To be human is to know loss in its many forms. Acknowledging this reality enables us to find our way into the grace that lies hidden in sorrow." So I invite you to be present to that quote for a moment. Notice any words or phrases or images that arise for you that are calling for your deeper attention. And I will place both quotes in the chat in a moment so that you have them readily available to you. The second quote, also from The Wild Edge of Sorrow, is a bit longer, and it speaks to the nature of grief, but maybe some of the dimensions that we might not naturally associate with it. So Weller says that grief is subversive. It's undermining the quiet agreement to behave and be in control of our emotions. It is an act of protest that declares our refusal to live numb and small. There is something feral about grief, something essentially outside the ordained and sanctioned behaviors of our culture. Because of that, grief is necessary to the vitality of the soul. Contrary to our fears, grief is suffused with life force. It is not a state of deadness or emotional flatness. Grief is alive, wild, untamed, and cannot be domesticated. It resists the demands to remain passive and still. We move in jangled, unsettled, and riotous ways when grief takes hold of us. It is truly an emotion that rises from the soul. So again, I invite you to spend a few moments. What words, phrases, images are shimmering for you, calling for your attention? I'm going to place both of those quotes in the chat. And what I'd like to invite you to do is to think about how you understand grief and maybe write something down about that. What is grief to you? And not thinking too long about it or too in depth, but when you hear the word grief, what comes to your mind and heart? And then to see of both quotes, maybe it's one over the other, maybe it's both of them, but how do they speak to you about grief? Do they resonate? Do they challenge you? What do they feel like as you hear them, as you receive them? I'd like to give you about 5 minutes to spend some time reflecting on that. And it looks like some of you are already placing some comments in the chat. Thank you for that. All are welcome to do that. We'll also have an opportunity to be able to share in our larger group as well. And thank you to those folks who took the initiative to write in the chat. So both of the quotes are now in the chat. And so let's spend that time for the next handful of minutes. I'll let you know when there's about a minute left for your journaling. I'm going to invite you to take about one more minute as you're contemplating, or if you're journaling, if you're writing anything in the chat about what grief means to you, or how those two quotes, which humbly I think contain a lot of wisdom about grief, are speaking to grief. All right, so I'm going to invite you to pause there with your journaling and contemplation. If it feels like more is still coming out, I invite you to earmark that and return to that later, and welcome whatever else is forming for you. Some folks in the chat talked about grief being numbness, loss, emptiness. I'd like to open it up for a few minutes here with our community to see if anyone else wants to share what grief means to you, or if anything contained in the quote spoke to you. Again, whether it challenged you or comforted you or made you feel seen. Um, and, it's particular to the experience of grief as a caregiver for a person with dementia. But it also is speaking into the reality of grieving throughout our lives. We bring all of the losses that we've experienced to the current place of loss and transition and change. And so maybe there's something in what Francis Weller is saying, or within your own wisdom, that you might want to share. So you can do that if you want to turn on your video. You're welcome to unmute. You can raise your hand and I can call on you. You can use the Zoom icon for raised hand. You can put something in the chat, whatever feels comfortable to you. Yes, Emily.
Well, thank you for offering the quotes. I wanted to speak to them. We've had a recent passing in the family and big family, and especially the second quote so resonated with me given the dynamics. I love the notion of grief offering grace. So I'm really curious about others and how you're feeling about grace. I think it's such a vulnerable time and such a precious, sacred time and a grace-filled time. But I love, love, love. Grief is subversive, is feral. In our family, there's a lot of course, loss and anger, and also tenderness. And the feralness is I just think precious. We're so grateful that we have one another to express this anger and also the love and the joy we had with our family members. So what an opening, I think, to allow such a mix of feelings. That this quote really invites me anyway to allow the feralness, not repress it. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And I'm glad that that spoke to you. It's certainly a different way of thinking about grief and thinking about something that is so close to us because we are experiencing it. So to kind of reframe it in that way opens up to those possibilities. Anyone else like to share?
I appreciate in the quote where she says, grief is alive and wild and cannot be domesticated. I thought it was just me that grief would just sneak up on when you least expected it. So it's nice to know that's a general truth for folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne Marie. It's good to hear from you. One of our friends with us today is talking about denial. Denial is challenging, and when indicated that we will get you help, the reply is no. That is very challenging. We'll talk a little bit more about denial, a couple slides that I'll share from some of the folks through the last century or more who've done some important work about grief and how we've come to understand it societally, that denial often accompanies that experience. And in some ways, it can be counterproductive to our experience of grief. Any other thoughts about grief or the quotes before we continue on? Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of intentionality in the things that are going to be showing up today for you. So those quotes were selected with that intention of expanding how we conceive of grief and how we might be called to notice it more in our lives and in our caregiving. So please feel free if something bubbles up or resonates throughout the rest of our time together to share about that, either in our large group or in the chat. I also wanted to mention, as Emily read a part of my bio about being in the Doctor of Ministry program at St. Mary's, I'm about to begin my research, and what I'm focusing on is three realities: dementia, grief, and spiritual practices. And so my research question that I'll be exploring is, how can the experience of intentional grief work through a spiritual lens, and so that's very broad, and I'll say more about spiritual later on, but essentially that deepest part of ourself where we make meaning. How can that caregiving for someone with dementia be positively influenced when the care partner engages in grief work through a spiritual lens? And it combines that intersection of those three, really combines my life's work and what I have been privileged to witness throughout many years of serving people in the healthcare field, and in my own personal life and other circles, where if folks were able to welcome that grief and all the things that grief means a little bit more intentionally, the difference that it made, the positive difference. It didn't recover the loss. It didn't halt the change. It didn't cause the transition to deter itself, but it allowed for that person in their authenticity to gather maybe those graces that Francis Weller mentions in order to be able to move forward with it. And nobody said it was easy. We know that some of the most difficult things in our lives often yield the greatest transformation or the greatest fruit, but they're not easy to endure. And so part of where I'm hoping my research will lead me, we will see, is that there is still possibility in the experience of dementia and caregiving for someone with it, if we as the care partner can reframe our grief, if we can really welcome it and be present to it. We live in a cultural construct and a society that denies death and denies grief, and that doesn't support us, because death, the capital D death, and all the little deaths along the way in our lives can't be ignored or relegated to shadowland. They're meant to be integrated into who we are. All right, I'm going to pull up the slide deck again and share a little bit about some of the work that's been done in the last century to help grief get put on the map. So we're looking first at William Worden, who was a psychologist, and in the 1980s, he helped the world to conceive of grief as a set of tasks to be engaged and completed. And in a way, this might look like, oh, okay, there's task one, and then I'm going to task two, but he did not conceive it as that linear. So task one, really coming to terms with the reality that the loss has happened. And the second task is working through the pain of grief, not only the collision of different emotions, but what grief is trying to do, trying to open us up, trying to move the heart from being broken to being broken open. The third task is then adjusting yourself and your life to a different type of environment in which that person or that relationship or whatever the loss is not there in the same way that it used to be. And then that fourth task is to emotionally relocate the loss. So here he's talking specifically about the death of someone. But again, there's many different losses. To emotionally relocate the loss and that energy into something new and different. Maybe it's a new relationship, a new endeavor. Depends on what the loss is, but that helps to facilitate moving forward with one's life. Then the work of Therese Rando, who's also a psychologist, sociologist, started to explore grief and looks at 6 different R needs. And these are the needs of mourning. And there is a difference between mourning and grieving. Rather simply, mourning is how we grieve publicly. And grief or grieving tends to be associated more with our personal lives and private expression of confronting that loss. So Therese Rando looks at these different needs, and they all begin with the letter R, so that's helpful. The first one is the need to recognize the loss. That's right at the gate, right at the beginning there. And then the need to be able to react to the separation. We are separated from that person, that place, that thing, that reality, that experience. And so the need to be able to react. Third is recollecting. And this involves that time of remembering, but also re-experiencing. And again, this says the deceased, but re-experiencing what was through recollections. Then, and this one's rather a difficult juncture in this journey of mourning needs, but relinquishing old attachments. And this one is very unique to each person as they are on that journey with grief, relinquishing the old attachments. There's a lot of anxiety and other conflicting emotions that arise because we often will feel that if I let go, then that means I don't love that person or that thing that I'm grieving. I don't love them anymore, if I relinquish and let go. But what Therese Rando is really speaking to is about our attachment to that person, place, or thing. And so relinquishing that attachment to make room for something else. So that making room then comes with the 5th need of readjusting to a new world. And that echoes what William Worden was talking about, that new reality where that person, place, or thing is not there in the same way that they used to be. And then lastly, just like Worden's 4th task, this is the need to reinvest one's emotional energy in, again, a number of different persons, places, and things. The last grieving paradigm that I want to share comes from both Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who as a hospice worker for many years has been a personal hero. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross really put death and grief on the map in America. Not being from America, but spending much of her life and her career here, she made a noticeable difference in the way that we conceive of death and grief, particularly on a meaning-making level. So I would say spiritual level. And one of her co-collaborators and student that she mentored, David Kessler, is also a pioneer in particularly grief. And so he has taken the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross named in the middle of the 20th century and added a 6th stage. So the final stage in the other 2 paradigms that I just highlighted talked about reinvesting emotional energy, reinvesting oneself in something that's different. It's a relocation of oneself and one's energy and desire, if you will. So similarly with Kessler's 6th stage, it's about finding that meaning. So that takes us to that place of openness to other possibilities. However, and these are not meant to be linear either, Kubler-Ross documented how people experienced quite a bit of denial. I've often heard it said as denial is the great shock absorber. And so some of us linger longer in denial than others. as we come to terms with the reality of what's changing before us. Many people experience anger, and then some don't, depending on what the loss is. There's quite a bit of bargaining, especially when a person who is dying of a terminal illness is trying to make amends and do some kind of bargaining if they can have longer to live. But the bargaining also happens for care partners grieving, whether they're aware of it or not, for the person they're caregiving for. If they could just stay this way a little bit longer, I'll give up this, I'll do that. Depression can very much plague the experience of grief. And again, many people spend time on depression drive, and there are folks that skip this stage. And again, these are not meant to be linear. Oftentimes they might be experienced concomitantly and in one reality alone, and others dovetailing or overlapping with some of the other ones. For Kubler-Ross, acceptance was the final stage. And that was not accepting per se that the fight is over, but accepting the reality of what's happening. And if the acceptance occurs, then healing is still possible. Perhaps not a cure or a redo, but healing, integration, wholeness. So David Kessler then builds upon that and has written a book about the sixth stage of grief and finding meaning, where he explores how that connects a person, a community who's experienced a loss, significant change or transition, to be able to create meaning out of it. So I'd like to just stop there for a moment and see if anyone has any questions or comments about those paradigms. Feel free to unmute if you'd like to share your video. If you're not able to and you just want to unmute and speak, you can also put things in the chat. And let's see, somebody did have something in the chat here. How do you encourage the person with said situation to get diagnosed with being angry? You suggest due to many triggers, as being on the receiving end is frustrating on a daily basis. I'm wondering, it looks like the name is Grabine. I'm wondering, Grabine, if you could unmute and say a little bit more about that. I think that's an important question there. Just want to make sure that I fully understand it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. So
Hi.
I'm not a doctor, but just the many situations that have happened over the last year and a half, and more so recent than I care to deal with. Just the easily agitated, angry, depressed, just unhappy with life, miserable, negative, the whole gamut. And no matter what you do, they don't want to hear it. And even as recent as last night, I'm like, we're going to get you help. And he just went off the deep end. So how do you try to help someone?
I think that's a really important question. I wish I had a simple answer for you. But I think I wonder if the question is an invitation from something greater that lands on your heart. So not so much as helping the person you're caregiving for, but helping you at that moment. If you've tried various things, and if you perhaps are working with other family or professionals to help in the situation, and it feels like nothing's budging, maybe it's not the time for that dimension of it, but maybe there's an invitation for you to be more present to yourself and what you need at this time. Is it an invitation to be able to grieve the reality that for the person you're caregiving for, that they're not changing right now?
Right,
And
they're in
making
denial
space.
to no end.
Yeah. And so that's not something that you really have control over or any agency over. But for yourself, is there an invitation to be able to grieve that? I know that doesn't necessarily translate to something practical, that would change it for that person that you're caregiving for. but I'm wondering if it's something more readily available to you to help you along the way as the caregiver, the care
Well, I guess
partner.
my concern is because things that can't even speak. Things are being brought to my attention as other folks are noticing the decline, the repetitiveness, the angriness, the agitation, just all the dynamics that go along with said disease.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not Houdini. I can only do what I can do.
I know, I know. And and this might be an opportunity that we could explore on the side, or there might be other folks here that could speak to that. So I don't want to limit this just to my response. But I guess the last question I have is the person being treated with medical care at this time
No,
or no? Okay.
it's just
So
been
that
my
might,
observation and trying to be proactive to get said test done to see where he actually is.
yeah. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I again I'll encourage you to get in touch with Baltimore County Department of Aging, and perhaps even Emily with Dementia Friendly to maybe take other steps around that part of it. But
Mhm.
what I want to invite you to perhaps hold with you is for right now, what do you have to let go of as a way of grieving that allows more space for you in your caregiving? And there's no easy answer to that, but just to maybe hold that with you to reflect on while getting help with the other practical piece that you need.
Right. Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I am going to oh, and thank you. Emily just put her contact info in there. Oh, good. All right, I'm going to share screen, and we're going to watch a clip of a longer video. I do have the video included in my resources slide, but let me share screen for a moment. So this video was created by the creator of Care Blazers, Dementia Care Heroes. And so we're going to watch a, a clip that spans a couple minutes, and then we'll see if there's anything that we want to respond to in it. Please unmute and let me know if anyone's having trouble hearing or seeing it.
When you love somebody with dementia, you are basically watching your loved one go through loss after loss after loss. It's like this long, drawn out process that can take years, even a decade. And it's different. Like when somebody dies from something very sudden or even something very clear, the community gathers, friends and family gather, they offer their condolences, they offer you support, they bring food, they check in, they surround you with the love and support that's really helpful. But when it comes to dementia and you're caring for somebody with dementia, it can seem like the opposite happens. Maybe in the beginning people are checking in and they're offering support, but as year after year after year goes by, it almost seems like people start to disappear. And when you need the support and help more than ever, it can feel like you're all alone in this journey. In some ways, it's like this never-ending cycle of saying goodbye. First, you might be saying goodbye to the dreams of traveling and retirement. Then maybe you're saying goodbye to the ability to have stimulating and intellectual conversations with your loved one. Then maybe you're saying goodbye to the ability to get out of the house together and go places together. Then maybe you're saying goodbye to more of those intimate moments you used to share with each other. It's like loss after loss after loss. The author of this book called this type of loss ambiguous loss. It is a long, drawn-out process of goodbye after goodbye after goodbye versus that very clear-cut, defined moment in time where your loved one is gone. So I want to share with you 3 key takeaways I got from reading the book in hopes that it can help you along your journey. First, is to get comfortable with ambiguity. What this means is it's the idea that somebody can be here and also be gone. That maybe your spouse isn't who you married, but still someone you love and care for. It basically means you have two opposing views at the same time. It's knowing that your parents alive and here, yet also knowing that they're gone. It's days that you're grateful your loved one's still here, and also days when you just wish the struggle will end. It's all a bit messy, and it's all completely normal. It's basically living in the middle ground, getting comfortable in the middle. The second takeaway I got from this book is grieve along the way, and I really like this takeaway. So it's impossible to fight back all the pain and tears and loss that you're experiencing watching your loved one go through this disease process. If you tried to hold that all back, you could be holding it back for many years, right? But it doesn't also mean that you're going to be somber and cry every day. Remember the first strategy, we're living in the middle, we're getting comfortable with ambiguity. But what grieving along the way means is that you can come up with a way to recognize and honor each significant loss as it happens. And the book had some really beautiful ways that caregivers honored those losses or had rituals for those losses along the way. Some caregivers would go to their church and light a candle with each big loss that their loved one went through. Another caregiver would document and write in her journal about this next stage of life. Another caregiver would invite close family and friends to come together for a gathering to again recognize another step and loss in the journey. How can you develop a ritual that is meaningful to you and allows you to recognize and honor the next loss that your loved one is having? So there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just something that's meaningful for you. And it could be anything like the examples I just gave you from the book, or it could be things like you plant a new plant. You might go for a nature hike. You might meditate. You might call up a friend and share the memories that are lost now and sharing in the next decline. You might look through an old photo album of you and your loved one together. Right? But just kind of get creative and see if this is something you might want to incorporate in your caregiving journey in terms of how do you want to grieve along the way. And the third takeaway was accepting what is. I really liked in the book how it talked about that you can grieve more easily when you don't try so hard to get over it. There is no neat closure. There is no clear ending. It's okay, it's possible for you to love a shell of a person if that's what you want to do. It's getting to this place of acceptance of what is, not really being happy with what's going on, but accepting that it is going on. Knowing that your loved one isn't going to get better, that they're going to continue to get worse. Having conflicting emotions about being really sad that this is happening, but also being frustrated that this is happening or looking forward to when this is no longer happening. Just really accepting the situation, the reality of the situation, acknowledging that it's okay to have those conflicting emotions, acknowledging and being okay with it's messy. It's human life and it's okay. And you just have to get through it the best way you know how. And there is no right way.
So that video highlights a lot of different things that the narrator had connected with in that important book that she read. So I'd like to just make a space for a few minutes to see any comments or questions or things that might be arising for you, particularly from the video or any of the grief paradigms that we looked at earlier. Anything that's on your heart right now. Yes, Emily.
Hi. Thank you for all this wonderful fodder to let steep and consider. I really appreciate in terms of the different models and definitions of grief, the messiness, the non-linearness, I know I've read some critiques of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work from folks who say it's too linear, but I think that's how it's been interpreted by some, as this rigid, simple trajectory with discrete stages. And I really like your presentation. It resonates that it's not that it's this linear progressive trajectory. It's actually more of a spiral or a squiggly Zentangle. So some
Mm,
stages are revisited and then we go back and forth. And so I wanted to say that that part makes sense to me in my own experience, and affirm the importance of these different models. And also a shout out to David Kessler's work. I don't know if folks know he offers a program called Tender Hearts, where there are different support groups based on the type, not the type of grief, but the specific grief. It could be loss of a mother, it could be ambiguous loss because of a long-term illness or disease like, Alzheimer's. Anyway, so those two offerings I think were really important for me. So thank you.
thank you so much for that. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? I'll just highlight again what the narrator talked about as 3 takeaways under the mantle of ambiguous loss. And I wonder how many of us here today were aware that there's an actual name for this type of loss, for loving and or care partnering with someone who has memory loss, has dementia. There's an actual type of grief for this, the ambiguous loss. That alone is liberating for many folks to know, yes, there's a name for what I'm experiencing here. I was thinking about what Anne-Marie had mentioned earlier. But the 3 takeaways then under that mantle of ambiguous loss: being comfortable with ambiguity and grieving along the way, which is what I'm really after in this presentation, to invite you to awaken to your grief that's already there and to be able to engage it. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, in this current climate and our society and culture, grief is something, that, okay, when there's a death of someone, you get 3 days off and then you're back to work. I mean, that's the ancient paradigm of how it has been in America. And so then maybe there's this box and our emotions are in there and we put it up on the shelf, and once a year we bring it down and we open it up and look in there. Okay, 5 minutes, and then we put it back up on the shelf. That is actually anti-human. I mean, it's the antithesis to how we were designed and created to be able to navigate change, transition, and loss. It's about integration. And so grieving along the way really facilitates that. Again, big disclaimer, it's not easy. And then lastly, accepting what is. And that's also really challenging. Yes, Russia, if you could unmute, we'd love to hear from you.
I love the fact that there's accepting what is, because a lot of individuals may experience, years before they could fully accept the fact that the person is transitioning, or the fact that the person has transitioned, as the caregiver may experience aftermath. I do love that part about it. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. All right. Well, as other things emerge, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. And all right, we've got some things in the chat. Yes, as caregivers, we get the blunt end of everything. Yes. So what I'm going to introduce now, I'm going to pull the slides back up. But this is something that really I invite and I encourage you to jot down. It's 3 questions. And even if you aren't a person that journals or really writes in response to things, maybe you could do it by email, or just type something up, whatever feels right. But these are 3 of the simplest questions that exist. And yet, in the context of being a care partner for someone who has dementia, these 3 questions are the most powerful. And so this is very much aligned with that grieving along the way. And if we were all on a retreat or in a workshop together in person, I'd be breaking us up into pairs and we'd be doing this in response to each other. We're in a different format. So I want to just invite a few minutes here for us to be able to entertain and consider what these questions are. So let me share screen. The first question is, what have you lost? Or maybe you might say, who have you lost? But what have you lost? Oftentimes, as I've journeyed with folks and accompanied them in their grief as a caregiver, this question, the response to this is often pretty lengthy. Once people really sit with that question and are able to name, what have you lost? Because it's about the person, it's about the relationship, the context, it's about what has to be sacrificed or given up. The second one is what still remains? And this is where we turn a sharp corner. Wow, I've been getting in touch with what's gone, what's lost. You mean there's still something there? As the journey with dementia continues, really contingent upon what disease or condition is causing the dementia, you see a diversity of responses to this question, what still remains? But it's also about what remains in you. The third question then is, what are your possibilities? What are your possibilities? So there's a significant intention behind the naming of these 3 questions and the order that they're in. So we don't really have enough time for you to journal with each of them in the order that they appear. That's something I'll invite you to do at another time and to really go through it that way. But I wonder, just for the sake of our purposes here today for the next couple minutes, is there one of these 3 questions that really stands out to you? And again, it might be because you think it's ridiculous or it's too challenging to contemplate, or maybe it resonates. Maybe it's intersecting with your sense of hope or that need to remember that joy is still there, even in despair or darkness. So I want to give you a few minutes to pick one of those questions and to respond to them. Put them in the chat for you. I know some of you are sharing in the chat. Thank you for that. I'd like to give you maybe another minute or so to be present to one of those questions. And also, if it's possible, just to commit to exploring them in the order that you see them at a later time and seeing what that unlocks for you. Right. So I'm going to pause our attention there with those questions and invite us into the final area of our presentation today. And this is one that we could camp out or have a slumber party with for a week because it's so rich and we're only skimming the tip of it here. But as I mentioned, as I'm about to begin my research through that venue, but also many years of serving individuals with dementia and their care partners, the vitality and the sustenance that spiritual or meaning-making practices has had is too incredible to really even articulate. And I want to be clear about the word spiritual because that means a lot of different things to folks. And in this context, spiritual is what brings meaning. And so what are practices? Well, I've got a couple images here. Journaling, time spent in nature, prayer, meditation, listening to music. That's just a handful. There are a diversity of numerous different things that people can turn into a spiritual practice, an exercise, an activity, an engagement, a time in stillness that creates meaning for us. I cannot say this enough, having been a caregiver myself for my beloved parents. This is what saved me time and again. A spiritual practice is something that gives you an anchor in the oceanic storm that never seems like it's going to settle. If we can be faithful to a spiritual practice, it's a way of honoring ourselves. It's the way of honoring the grief that we are called to experience and that brings about our transformation, brings about our highest good. So spiritual practices and making time for them, and that's the most challenging part as care partners. How do I make time for something when I don't have time? And if you do, even if it's 5 minutes a day, it will begin to anchor you and become part of your foundation. So there are many other spiritual practices. Some might be connected to your experience if you're part of a faith tradition or a worshiping community. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it's, as the video mentioned and the narrator talked about, creating a ritual. You know, ritual can be understood in one sense of it's something that's part of my routine. It's my daily ritual. And that's indeed what a spiritual practice can foster. And a ritual set apart at different times, not on the daily, is also quite powerful and transformational because it allows you to then take what you're experiencing internally and place it outside of you, and that there are others holding it with you, whether it's just like souls, if it's nature, if you have a belief in a higher power, that you're not alone in it because you've brought it outside of you and you've done it in a way that has been creative. You've created it. The ritual, it helps to name it, and then you don't feel so alone and you don't feel like it's weighing you down. So maybe creating a ritual could be a spiritual practice. For some folks, it's spiritual reading, something that inspires you. Maybe it's a quote a day. Maybe you journal with it. So again, that's just the tip of the iceberg of things that are spiritual practices for folks. But I really want to speak that into our time together as a possibility and a way of honoring yourself and your grief that brings about your further transformation and can sustain you on your path as a care partner for someone with dementia whose reality is always changing and whose losses are also accumulating. So I wanted to mention 2 slides here. Resources for going deeper. And of course, since this is recorded, you'll have this. But here are some various texts that help to inform the presentation today, and ones that I've referenced and ones that I really stand by as someone who spiritually accompanies folks who are caregiving and also experiencing grief and loss. And here's the link to the video that we showed earlier, and then a podcast and other things available on websites that can also be a blessing to you on your grief journey. And again, these will be available to you. All right, I'm going to stop for a moment, just see if there's any questions or comments, and then if not, I have a brief closing meditation for us, hopefully to help integrate all that we've been sharing about today. So just want to see, is there any questions, comments? Thank you, Grace Ann, for your comment in the chat. I know it's a lot of material in a condensed amount of time, so especially with something as intimate and tender as the topic of grief, things might percolate later on. I'll leave my contact information in the chat if you wanted to reach out to me. I would be honored to hear from you. Also, if you wanted to come and visit at Well for the Journey, we'd love to have you.
And I think I'll hop in here so that I don't abruptly interrupt the sacredness of the closing meditation. Just to say, if you have any questions or you want further resources regarding caregiving, care partnering, and/or dementia friendly, reach out to us at the Department of Aging, Baltimore County, and I put my contact information in the chat. I will do that once more. But I want to thank you all for being here now. So again, I don't interrupt your meditation and the sacredness of the closing. And again, as was said earlier, this will be available on YouTube, and you can reach out to me to find the link if you don't see it immediately when you search the Baltimore County Department of Aging's YouTube channel. All right, and I want to thank you, Gordon, right now too, so I don't interrupt the sacredness for this impactful and very reflective session. So I'll stop there so you can go ahead with the meditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And I did want to mention one other thing too, because this is the final session in our MAP series presentations, but please consult the MAP itself. And particularly for this section on grief, there are also various sources listed too that Emily alluded to that can help flesh out some of the things that we only spent a brief amount of time on. All right, so back to the slide deck, and what I am honored to share with you now in closing are various photographs of places in nature, in particular in the Shenandoah Valley, Rappahannock County area of Virginia. And some of you might be familiar with Luray Caverns, Skyline Drive. So these are photos that I took at a time of transition, which is very poignant for us today as we're examining grief and how that's connected to our transitions, losses, and changes. And so I invite you to see the image for whatever it means to you. It's various vegetation and leaves and soil and places in a forest that are amidst transition. And as you see the images, I'll be sharing a couple different quotes, kind of at an even pace, and I'll name where the quote comes from as you're receiving the image and hearing my words. I have come to accept the feeling of not knowing where I am going, and I have trained myself to love it, because it is only when we are suspended in midair with no landing in sight that we force our wings to unravel and, alas, begin our flight. And as we fly, we still may not know where we are going to, but the miracle is in the unfolding of the wings. You may not know where you're going, but you know that so long as you spread your wings, the winds will carry you. C. Joy Bell. From Broken Open by Elizabeth Lesser. How strange that the nature of life is change, yet the nature of human beings is to resist change. And how ironic that the difficult times we fear might ruin us are the very ones that can break us open and help us blossom into who we were meant to be. Charles Darwin reminds us that it is not the strongest nor the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best adapt to change. And from an anonymous wise soul, sometimes when things are falling apart, they may actually be falling into place. From Leon Murray, today I will focus on appreciating all the blessings in my life. When I feel my grief, I will allow myself to feel it while simultaneously looking on the flip side for my gratitude. Li Po says there is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, and of unspeakable love. Receiving the gift of this meditation, the images and words, and our context of being in the season of autumn, where we are taught on that deepest level that it's okay to let go, that everything has a cycle and a purpose in that cycle, and that things can truly be their most beautiful while in transition, that it all holds together and belongs. And so, what is being asked of you today? What do you want to take away with you from our time in community, gathering to hear and learn and share and name our grief as care partners together. Perhaps it's that sense of solidarity, that we're not alone, that grieving is natural and empowering. That our perspective and our experience can be reframed with greatest meaning. That we belong to something greater, and that grief is a natural part of that rhythm. And lastly, from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a broken heart is precious indeed. The best thing is to set aside a certain period each day to pray with a broken heart, and then to spend the rest of the day in joy. One heart, all hearts together. So it's been my distinct pleasure and joy to be here with you today. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you peace and blessings on your caregiving journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Thanks, everyone. And thank you to the communication team for this impactful session today and for the entire series. May you have a wonderfully reflective and meaningful day. Thank you.